Welcome to the Marvel Cinematic University podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Canton III, and we are continuing our coverage of the Disney Plus series, the animated series, I should say, X-Men 97, Episode 4. Kind of a nice little split here, MOTENDO and Life-Death Part 1. Very happy to talk about this episode. And first, we talk about this episode with the super producer, Jake Christie. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing well. The Mets just got their first win. I'm wearing the Mets hat. It's been embarrassing to be a fan of the team in Flushing this past week, but we're back on the right track. Walk-off win. Let's go Mets.
Hey, shout out to the Mets for getting their first W. The Yankees have not played one home game and they are 6-1. So let's see what happens as the Bronx Bombers start their first homestand in 2024. But we're not here to talk about baseball. We're here to talk about X-Men. We do have a guest with us. He goes by the name of dpalm. First time to the show, friend of pal Seahawk and Dalvin Osorio.
And I learned Rod. And I learned Rod as well. He's a regular.
Rod. Okay,
just friend of everyone.
Oh, so he frequents in our world. So it's a pleasure to have you on, sir. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you guys for having me. I understand that the week for the team from Flushing has been tough, but honestly, like we're talking 40 years of toughness in Flushing, aren't we?
Yes. I am a Mets, Jets, and Knicks fan. I'm 27 years old, and my life has been nothing but misery. So,
I mean, just to put it in perspective, the last time the Mets won a World Series, I was 1 month old.
Yep. Yep. The last time the Mets won a World Series, my dad, who got me into this mess, had a full head of hair.
Oh, wow.
The last time the Mets were winning World Series, the stories we're about to talk about were brand new.
Yeah.
That's great. Oh, my God. So, yes, X-Men 97, MOTENDO, Life-Death Part 1. dpalm, before we get into this episode, as normally, when we have a guest on who hasn't been able to talk about what they've seen previous, we want to get their thoughts on what the series has looked like to them thus far. So, what have you thought of X-Men 97 to this point?
Every podcast is someone's first podcast, to paraphrase Stan Lee. So I'm just going to really quickly introduce myself and let you guys know that I am an X-Men fan from way back. This has been a lifelong obsession. The first issue of X-Men I ever read was, I think it was Classic 12. It's the one with the Christmas cover and then fighting the Sentinels in the snow. I remember reading this in one of my friend's big brother's closet and being like, wait, there are more of these? There's a whole collection of these. The thing I watch on Saturdays, there's just years of this. And that started my love affair with comic books. I podcast over at MTR. I run the UD Pod, the sports podcast over there, but I also co-host all of our comic book podcasts, including our character corners, where we do deep dives. And a couple years ago, we did Chris Claremont. We did a whole 4-episode series on the Chris Claremont run. And I jokingly, when the first episode of this series came out this year, I said, here's episode 3 of that podcast for no apparent reason, because opening with the trial of Magneto is such a calling your shot for this staff in charge of this. For me to say, oh, if you're going to be watching X-Men 97, make sure you save yourself 2 weeks to explore the Summers family tree, and then have it thrown in my face in episode 2 and 3. It's been very, 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 very fulfilling. And I speak as someone who has had a very fulfilling life since about the beginning of the MCU, because the stories that the world is falling in love with, I used to be late to Wednesday practices at Columbia University. I played football because I'd go to Midtown to get my pull list first. Like, I love this stuff. And watching the world fall in love with the things that I already loved, it's almost like I was right the whole time, even though I didn't talk about it in mixed company unless I knew I was in a very safe space. So these first 4 episodes have been really an encapsulation. And watching the embrace of mainstream media, of comic book nerds, which very rarely those two worlds intersect so beautifully. But for them to say, oh, we're going full in on this vintage storytelling. We don't know if we're going to get renewed for a 3rd season. So let's go out with the heavy hitters. Let's go out with when the X-Men were running things in the world of comic books, what were the stories that were being told? And they just said, bet you can't do it in 30 minutes. And that's how we got here. And I couldn't be happier.
I have to say, it's been beautiful, like truly beautiful. And I mean that in the most sincere way, to watch the way that this has been constructed, the way that this week's episode felt very much like a comic book, like turning the pages as the scenes go by. And I mean, something I tweeted, I believe it was yesterday when the episode came out after I had seen it. One thing that I remember watching the animated series as a youngster, whether it be X-Men, Spider-Man, things along those lines, there was an element of sweetheart tension, romance, like that. They found a way to weave that in a way that felt so genuine, and there was like legitimate yearning. I mean, not to go too much on the tangent, but it's so funny when you look at Twitter nowadays and you get to the point of hear me out on this person or hear me out on that person, and then the other day Kim Mulkey tweets, and it's just like, yo, where did we go wrong as a society? And so to watch something like this, where you have the Jubilee Sunspot stuff, which is just it's just so sweet. It's just like really kind and nice to watch these two kind of grow together. And then on the other side, you have the Gambit stuff with Rogue and Magneto, and it's complicated. It's not easy, but you get the sense from Gambit there's this yearning that he has for Rogue, and it's not like Rogue doesn't have feelings for him and doesn't care for him, but then there's this really super powerful mutant who's, listen, Magneto's a smoke show. Let's keep it a buck. So when you
Opera
have
gloves and all.
yeah, when you put all that together, I found myself I was watching this, and then of course the Stormforge stuff that we'll get to later. I came away so impressed the with the writing and the way that this has been overall constructed. And again, like a friend of the show, Rod, has been tweeting, is like, what did that man do to get fired? Because it's like he's done about as good of a job with so much care to put this X-Men thing together so far. So, dpalm, if you could,
Sure.
like, just give me how you felt about Motendo. Let's go to the Motendo part of this first,
I was
and how that
rewatching. Go
how
ahead.
that was constructed in your eyes.
I was rewatching to get ready for the podcast just now, and I was like, "Oh, it's two different reviews. It's two different episodes. It's really they've maximized the space they've been given and said we can achieve both goals and still leave you wanting more." With the second half of my probably second favorite Storm story, just because Al Ewing's been a monster over on X-Men Red writing Aurora. Motendo really was. I loved it because it was a lot of meta commentary on what X-Men is. For him to say it's not drama and divorce courts, yes, it is. That's X-Men, particularly under Claremont's pen. I think that's one of the things that he was so able to effortlessly do from when he took over to when he walked away. It was forced out, whatever you want to call it. It's that the people mattered before the powers, which is in and of itself like quintessential Marvel, but it was the ability to communicate in short spans everything you know about these characters. One of my favorite characters in recent years has been Sunspot, Bobby, Berto, particularly under the pen of Jonathan Hickman. And to see like the flashes of that in this episode, everyone's not always looking at you like, yes, they are. I'm Berto. Like, of course they are. And it's just those little character notes that they're able to so succinctly. It's why the MCU works, because they take all this disparate information and say, give me the entire character in 5 words and then go film that. And that's the kind of, they've done 60 years of test kitchening. Why would you try to change it? Why would you say, oh, we need to do X, Y, and Z here? No, man, we've got sales. We can tell you what works. Daredevil's going to give us Born Again because they know it works. And so for Mojo to play into that, for Mojo to say, well, wouldn't you rather just fight Sentinels? And Genosha to the UN? No, Genosha is a slave state where we got away with one episode. It's a weird Cable appearance that really doesn't work with the rest of the things they've added since, but hey, let's leave it where it is. It's familiar and comfortable. And it's what he was enticing Jubilee with. It's like, don't you want to stay here? Don't you want to live here? Don't you want to, the simplicity? And oddly enough, it's become Sunspot saying, no, we've got to grow up. We've got to push these things. It's almost the anticipated pushback for people who are like, X-Men is woke, and I'm like, you don't know what X-Men is, and that's fine, but like, don't just repeat things you've heard because you've never picked up a comic written by anyone whose name isn't Rob Liefeld, who's writing a book. Which, go ahead, the jokes write themselves.
That's a lot in itself. Before I get to Jake, coming off of your point, like as far as that's concerned, where earlier in the episode, Jubilee wants to celebrate her birthday, and Magneto's like, I don't know about all that. You're not a kid anymore. This is a different world. Well, shout out to that Easter egg. But as far as that whole idea of power and responsibility, akin to Spider-Man, and the way that they weave that in here, where it's okay, like the rest of the X-Men is like, yeah, you can enjoy yourself, but then there's also this part that Magneto is right, where your responsibility to not only your people but to the world, there's a greater cause. So trying to balance those things is so fascinating.
It's really interesting because if you boil down the ethos of all the Marvel comics, they come down to that Uncle Ben saying,
yeah,
if you have power, you have to use it responsibly. And I think that's an excellent point by you, because it is kind of that friction of growing up. Like 18, they didn't pick, you could have turned 17. 18's a big signifier in our culture of this is adulthood. This is now when bills start, and it's you're in a rush to grow up. Well, don't rush. It's coming no matter what. And so I think that you're 100% right. It was really powerful to have them choose this vehicle to kind of explore that idea of what do you owe the world.
Yes. And Jake, in terms of what you saw in this portion of the episode, how'd you feel about it?
So I think that they did something really interesting. That the theme that dpalm was talking about, I think, was really well interwoven with the way that it was presented, because I think in the same way that Jubilee is being wooed by the nostalgia for the events that are taking place, I don't think it's an accident that the way that it's being presented is we get these clips of old school video games that I know for a fact the people who watched X-Men back in the day who are now watching this are probably super nostalgic about those type of video games. And I think that it's a nostalgia for both the character and for the audience, that this is, not like, it's not an accident that they decided to do it as a video game. And there was obviously tons of, Easter eggs for people who were gamers back in the day of, like hit cycles and all that. And I thought that was all really fun. Like, that's really what I latched onto, was the way that they kind of were, making fun of the way that video games used to be. And I think that, I think Jubilee's been a character that has been there hasn't been much in the first 3 episodes of her. And so I'm glad that they gave her a spot, because she's a kid, she doesn't really fit in. Like, there's no way to have her in these entanglements. And so, I'm glad that they got her involved. And I really like, dpalm, what you said about Sunspot, that everyone's watching him. And I think that is kind of, it's an interesting thing to put in tension, because so much of what the X-Men are about is like, you should be proud of who you are, etc. But I think that it's easy for some people to say that, but there are people like Sunspot who, if he were to be out about his mutantness, it would harm him in a way. Like, it's not as simple as just like, well, it's like, Jubilation Lee is not, a wealthy heir who has a lot of pressure on her. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really easy for her to say that. And so I think I like that, the relationship. I'm always a fan of, young people falling in love. That's always going to get a thumbs up from me. And so this was like, I think overall, I really like that that even though this is a 10-episode season, and I think in this day and age in TV, it's always like everything has to do with the plot. It's all plot. I don't understand what TV's all about. I think plot's important. I think this is like a really old school type of TV episode where it's like, no, there's a character we haven't investigated that much, and so we're going to take time to have a fun story that's maybe not related to the whole plot, that is about investigating her, about furthering her emotional journey, because that's what the show is about. The show is not about the individual plot that this is about, because no good show is.
Right. Well,
Jake, can I ask one question? Are you unaware of the big standee, like 6-person X-Men arcade game?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so
yeah,
go ahead. Please do explain.
The sprites used in the show are from that game.
Interesting.
That That's very funny. So like, yeah, the nostalgia of this is like I burned quarters playing this
Yeah.
game, beating up on different colored Sentinels and different colored Saurons, like,
Got it.
and having to get to the
I
final boss.
apologize.
And
As I always do, I apologize for showing my age, but no,
No,
the only, it's something I never went to arcades, but it really was like the big one was the Simpsons arcade game, and then by the time I was like 10, people didn't really go to arcades anymore. Really, honestly,
that's fair.
That is a hashtag unwashed agenda.
yeah,
But yeah, I think when the gaming aspect, and I was thinking about Mojo, and funnily enough, as I show some of my vulnerability here, when I was younger, and we had the X-Men Sega Genesis game where it was based off of being in the danger room and glitches in the danger room, and you were using all of the different characters to fight um, X-Men bosses and villains, and Mojo. Playing against Mojo when I was that young, because I was that young. I'm thinking like 6, 7, 5, something like that, or whatever. Mojo gave me nightmares, man. I mean, goodness gracious. So that ugly dude with the legs and everything.
I had nightmares for a different reason. If you remember the Mojo level, the game resets. You have to hit reset on the Sega Genesis to advance the level. I
Oh,
thought I
right.
had broken my Genesis, and I was having nightmares. I had to explain to my mother that I broke the Genesis playing X-Men.
Oh, well, that's a whole different set of nightmares. Oh my goodness gracious, yeah, yeah.
I
Back
mean,
then, it's a pretty
if
penny, boy, pretty penny.
if the last year and change hasn't taught us anything, it's that TV executives absolutely should be the stuff of nightmares. I mean, that just makes sense.
But yeah, that I think that yeah, they to the point about the gaming aspect, it does, along with everything that I said earlier, it kind of just tugs on that nostalgia element. It kind of like puts it to the max when you're just remembering. I mean, the arcade game, I just remember playing that all the time and fighting Sentinels and fighting all of the villains and all the other stuff. And it was what is it? You could have as many as 2, 3, 4 players or something like along those lines, and just like that mashup stuff that you saw with not only X-Men but Ninja Turtles as well. Like that just fits the mold of what we grew up with. So to get that in this episode was really really cool. So dpalm, like as far as not only just like little Easter eggs, mention the different world stuff. It was cool that the actual voice of Jubilee in the original X-Men animated series shows up as the kind of the glitch towards the end, and they
Okay,
have that
so
conversation. Yeah, go
very
ahead.
funny. That character's name is Abshisha. You can see it in the closed captioning. This is a character that existed for literally one issue of Wolverine in 1992. Like, you
Oh.
talk about deep cuts, you talk about things that I'm like, I know this from somewhere. This is what I'm talking about. And we're going to, there's way more, of course, in Life Death, but for them to even for even have the tiny Easter egg of is Spiral working against Mojo at the very end. The commentary on we're going to bring Dazzler because I think this is originally a Dazzler-esque story because she's so tied in with the Mojo verse and Longshot. But Dazzler was busy. Don't ask. Like they even like lampshade that kind of stuff for like a nerd like me who's like, I love they're using Jubilee like Dazzler, and she's like, we're going to mention Dazzler, but we're not going to have like Shatterstar be his own father. Please read X Factor comics; they're fantastic.
So, in terms of Mojo as a villain, it's very cartoonish, very joking, and in the same vein as the original animated series. I remember that one where all of the X-Men get trapped in his little trap and whatnot. I think that was during the storyline where concurrently we had Xavier and Magneto on their way to the Savage Land, or they were in the Savage Land during that time period.
So
Because
that'd be first half season 2.
yeah, that's when they got separate. That's when
The
Xavier got
wedding and everything
separated.
else. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know. I haven't rewatched the show in a long time, honestly. I will say that Mojo in the comics is always kind of like almost like an imp. Like it's dangerous, but also like you said, kind of fun and lighthearted. He created the X Babies for Christ's sake. Like it is the idea that he is, like you said, a television producer and that people are benefiting from watching the X-Men get put through peril is one of those things that every time it pops up, you're like, huh, that's kind of weird and fourth wall breaking, and they really don't delve into the concept. But I liked how they did it here, where he's like, we've evolved to video games and the idea of putting commercials in video games, which I think is what Twitch is. I'm old, so I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what Twitch is for.
Right. And now to kind of, because you've mentioned a lot about the comics and how that's translated in terms of the animated series that we've seen, I say recently over the last few years, or animated movies to a degree. How would you say that this one has stacked up in terms of the way that translating comics to screen? Because it's always talked about within MCU, especially the like the real MCU nerds who like associate with the comics like you do. How have you felt that this has translated so far? Because I mean, you mentioned the trial of Magneto, you mentioned all of that, all of the little bits and nuggets that Bo DeMaio put in this. It has been so. I think the word is for me enriching, because it's like this is stuff that I really want the MCU live action in some ways to do, and they just can't help themselves and kind of we want to do it, but then we don't go all the way. There's like a very few, I feel, properties in the MCU live action that have really taken it there. And I realize that with animation, it's a little bit different and you have a little bit more capabilities to do more. But how have you felt that this has stacked up? And I noticed that you had a little smile when I mentioned MCU live action, so I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that too.
I'm an MCU fan. Like I said, this is everything I've ever loved, being put on the big screen and consumed by people and making billions of dollars, and essentially me doing a victory lap every time something comes out. So I'm the wrong one to be like, oh, here's what I would do differently. Look, they've built something that's never been done before in the history of film,
Yes, that's true.
ever. And for people who say, oh, it's doing that, you're trying to predict a storm that's never landed before. We don't know what's next. We know they haven't really missed. Like you can say, oh, they didn't make as much money. But I'm telling you that their barometer now isn't money. They've done the thing, they've
Yeah.
made the money. The barometer now is we're going to tell our story. And for me, that is like, say what you people, oh, I hated, what was the last Thor?
Oh, Love and Thunder?
People say they hated it. Guys, it opens up with an atheistic screed given by Christian Bale saying the gods not only aren't real, they don't deserve your praise. And then he goes through and proves himself right through the entire movie. And you're like, wait, I know a big corporate monster made this, and you want to say, oh, here's what I would do differently. But it's one thing to say, here's legitimate criticism, and here is the thing I fan fiction wrote in my head. Why didn't this
Yes.
match my fan fiction? How
Mhm.
dare they deviate? And
Yeah.
so for me, X-Men 97 is a culmination of their animated wing, particularly Marvel, for the last few years. You talk about
What if?
what if, and kind of, and yes, the art styles are very different, but it's also like them learning how to tell these stories in 30 minutes. They're able to create entire worlds, create conflict, and bring you not only resolution but the equivalent of splash pages that keep you hooked. And I think that's really what we've seen in X-Men episode 1. It's almost like Rob Liefeld drew it. It's just a bunch of splash pages. But like each time, each episode, no matter how intimate the storytelling has been, because let's be real, Motendo is a story about Jubilee and Berto being locked into a machine. They only interact with a freaky producer and another version of Jubilee. It's almost as intimate as an episode as you can get, but we still get the spectacle. We still get the excitement. We still get, for nerds like us, the sprites being used from 1985, like that ties back to like Pride of the X-Men and like the weird Australian Wolverine. Like we get all this stuff. And
The Days of Future Past
the
cover.
poster in the back where there's
Yeah.
clearly Havoc, and I'm gonna lose it again on the second half of this episode because I am the world's only Alex Summers mark. So I'm excited for the second part too.
Yes, it was really a lot of fun. Jake, do you have any further thoughts on this episode this part
No.
of the episode generally before we advance to what I'm really intrigued?
No, but I will say, to the point that you're talking about with the way that this is a culmination, like a good example of adapting, I think that they're just that this the thing that's effective about this is it uses the medium of animation really effectively, because I think people think that animation is just live action but drawn, but like there are just there are different writing rules to animation. The things that audiences will accept in animation are not the same as live action, which is why like while they can do better or capture more magic, etc., like the thing that will capture the magic, if you ask me what will capture the magic of a comic more, live action or animation, the answer will always be animation, just because the rules are more similar. Like there's just no, you can't make something live action more like a comic than animation. But I think that this is good because in comparison to something like What If, which sometimes feels like they're just animating what could be live action stories, this never, it always has things going on that only can be done in animation, that it uses animation styles and the animation the language of animation to effectively to communicate things really quickly. For example, like with this video game thing, the way that they communicate that they're in a video game is like so much easier and simpler than it would be if it was live action. And they don't need to have anything crazy. You don't need to explain as much in animation. And I think that that's what makes it feel like a comic. Because in a comic, you don't need to explain as much either because you're reading a comic. There's a level of alienation that the audience has from a comic and from a cartoon because we know it's a cartoon. And so there are things that we're willing to accept more readily, which is, some smart sociologist could explain why that is, but that's what I think is really good about this is that it doesn't just let that go to waste. It really emphasizes it, and like the fact that we go in between the video game sprites and what's actually happening so seamlessly. Like that's the thing you really only can do in animation, because if you do it in live action, then you have to explain. Okay, then are we viewing a video game? Who's controlling what? You have to explain rules that you don't need to explain in animation. And I think that I like that they're doing that. That they're not just taking a live action script and telling someone to draw it.
By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a true essence of what I thought a comic book live action movie was in Multiverse of Madness. I really thought that movie accomplishes the thing that I would say more so than anything that I look for, and when we talk about it being comic booky to that degree. The Love and Thunder portion that you mentioned, dpalm, I think is interesting because I don't hate Love and Thunder as much as everybody else does. I thought it was fine. Yeah, maybe you could make the argument that the jokes went a little too left and went a little all the way, but I think there's a lot of good in there that I feel like gets lost. And also, I would say it's fair that we are starting to know a little bit too much about what goes on behind the scenes with these productions, and I think it tends to cloud people's judgment as far as like they take that into what they're
It's also
watching.
the fact that we've effectively, and this is how you make generational things, how you make money forever. Ask Star Wars. People got mad they added Ewoks. It's like, no, there's a new crop of kids. Like those jokes, they're a little Harvey headed. Can we curse here?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, beep. Yeah, go ahead.
The jokes are heavy-handed, motherfucker. It's not about you. Like the children are in the studio. Like what you gave children powers at the end. They're like, why is this in here? So the kids can have something to hang on to. You bitter mother. Like it's. I'm just like, guys. Like just because you're not the target anymore doesn't mean you still can't find things that are enjoyable.
The amount of times that people complain about something with the MCU that I don't necessarily like that much, but they complain about the wrong thing. Like the reason why Love and Thunder isn't that good, in my opinion, is because it's a poorly directed movie. But like it's not, it's like, and I think that some of the bits are like, okay, Taika, you were having too much fun on set. But like when people bring up like the specific ending with the kids, I'm like, if that was executed better and didn't look like it was shot on a soundstage with no one around, like it'd probably be much better. Like the amount of times that happens, where it's like, no. This is bad or this is unsuccessful because it was done poorly,
Right.
not
Not the
because the
premise
idea is
itself.
bad. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually, I think, a fun idea of like, Thor learning to be more of a responsible adult and basically like helping kids like that. There's something thematically rich to that, but yeah, I think that's why I don't, as AC knows, I don't engage. The people I fought. If you have not been on this show, the only people I follow who tweet about the MCU are people who have been on the show. I don't follow anyone else. I don't care.
The only people I talk about it with are over at MTR, and then I talk about it with Cam and Rod. Like
Yeah.
I'm like, I care. It matters enough to me where I'm like, I don't need your angry because of how it happened. I'm good. It happened. They filmed Eternity, you idiots. Like I got Eternity. I got like a weird like conceptual thing put into a movie. Like that's so cool to me. Like that's Old Doctor Strange comic book nonsense.
And a year and a half from now, I'm gonna be sitting there with a mellow yellow, maybe a bag of Skittles. I'm gonna be watching female Silver Surfer, and I'm gonna be having a grand old time while everyone's having their own aneurysm. So
Can't
put
wait.
that in your pipe and smoke it.
Oh my god, yeah, that's a whole nother thing.
That's all we'll mention. I just wanted to mention it because I felt like mentioning it.
You should because I didn't even. It's so funny because I didn't even see a lot of that, and then I already heard like people was like, we already know what people are gonna say, and then of course
I looked at because I saw a lot of people saying, because I don't follow people, I saw a lot of people saying people bracing for the bad discourse. But then and I'm like, maybe there actually isn't. And then I went on not the official announcement, but the nerdsite.com's announcement, and they were there. They were there.
Yeah,
I would love for it to be a straw man thing, but they're always there. They're always there.
Because like I said, you have to look at the third tier nerd website tweet. That's where they are.
Yeah, shout out to Julia Gardner for getting that role.
Yeah, shouts to the joke that Caleb made where he put the thing from Ozark. That's on our Twitter. Anyway,
that was great. So yes, let's talk about Life Death Part 1, the Storm and Forge story, obviously adapted from the comics. dpalm, just give us a little bit of your thoughts from a comic book perspective as we enter this place where Storm is trying to find herself and find her powers at the same time.
Can I do nerdy Easter eggs first?
Absolutely, go ahead.
That's the happiest AC's ever been. He's waiting for someone else to say it on the show.
So there's an episode in the original series called Cold Comfort. It's my favorite episode because, again, I am a Peter David X Factor fan. I'm a Havoc mark, and so that's where Forge first meets the X-Men. There's Bobby Drake cameo in the intro this time, but when you look at that photo, it's him in the X-Force. But as you look at the corkboard to the right, you see Forge in his military outfit, and you see his arm around someone, and then the other person's head's cut off. But it's very clearly Bastion from Operation Zero Tolerance, and they're about to they're going to merge like Master Mold and Nimrod, which can I spoil a comic that is legitimately
yes,
knock it out,
30 years old at this point? Operation Zero Tolerance was a summer event, I believe, summer '99. It was the summer after Onslaught, and it was cool. It was a dope event. I enjoyed it. Bastion became a long-standing bad guy in the Marvel comics, and just the addition of Bastion being there made me giddy. Speaking as a translation of, again, probably a top 3 or 4 Storm story in the history of comic books, Life Death, I like how they did it here. Everyone's going to have a question about the compressed timeline of their relationship, which is logical. That's how Ford got slapped. But in the comics, it's not this long. Oh, that was the thing I wrote about that eventually became a gun. He made these weapons for the government. His hands directly made the gun that stripped her of her powers. Right. So the betrayal is a bit more on the nose in the comic. But other than that, even the wonkiness with the timeline plays into this isn't necessarily happening on this plane of existence. Right. She notes that the wind only comes from the east. The owl keeps coming. So the question begins: when did this journey into the world of the demon and the adversary truly begin?
Before we get to that part, I want to talk about the emotional aspect of what these two have, these two build towards in this time that we get with them, and I think I love because it's not just in rom-coms, it's in romantic movies in general. You have the two people who clearly have feelings for each other, but then there's that one thing that the person did that they didn't tell the other person about, and then it comes out by accident, and then everything gets messed up at the end of the second act, and you got to find a way for the third act for them to get these crazy kids together. So Jake, I know this is right in your wheelhouse.
It's not important to me.
Tell me what you thought about how this went.
So I think that Forge is, because coming without any context, Gil Birmingham doing the voice immediately gives him a deep well of pathos that really I don't think that this work. Obviously, I know that there is a compressed timeline because there's something funky going on, but I immediately buy that he is in love with her just from the way he speaks. It is that clear, and that is no small feat. And I think that you know, dpalm, you're talking about how they changed it from the comics. That in the comics he directly made the gun, and in this he kind of was just involved. I actually think that change, I like that change, not because I think that it softens it at all, but I think because he tries to say like, oh, I was just sort of involved, and Storm is like, no, that's bullshit. Like, that's a cop out, you know. And I think that moment is important for her, because it's not that, like, that's just as bad to her, because it's like, okay, so you knew that this was something bad, but because you didn't, like, I guess, put the finishing touches on it, you're going to convince yourself that you didn't do this. And so, like, there's just a well of sadness that both of them have that I think is really the impediment beyond anything else. Like, that Storm, I think, like, can't really let her surrender to this because she's so out of herself, because she just does not feel like herself at all. And it's like, even without this specific thing throwing a wrench into it, she still is reluctant to let her feelings, because she wants to be strong, because she feels vulnerable. She feels like she's in a dream that she showed up to school naked, and she feels vulnerable because she doesn't have her powers. I'm joking, but also, like, clearly the way that the thing she's communicated is that her powers are as essential to her as anything else. And so she is not looking for love right now, you know? And Forge, I don't think necessarily is looking for love himself, but, you know, he sees a goddess in front of him, and, you know, he's too broken of a person to be smooth about it, but he can't hide the way he feels.
That's a great way to put it. I think the level of captivation that Forge has with Storm is so apparent. And you mentioned the voice and just the mannerisms, the amount of care that he teaches with is really cool to see. And I want to get your thoughts on this aspect, Deep Plum, because yes, the adversary and that stuff we're gonna get to in a second. But I want to hear what you think about just this idea of building a relationship. And it feels like it's such a limited time, but it also feels at the same time like they did a really good job with presenting these two as, in some ways, old souls to a degree. And there's just that vulnerability aspect with Storm, and there's also a vulnerability aspect with Forge too, as he is somebody who has a robot leg and all of these things going on. He's not perfect. He's a tinkerer. All these things. He's trying to fix stuff, and it's an interesting aspect to look at. Oh, you're trying to fix Storm too, but also at the same time, he's still also trying to teach her that there's not necessarily something wrong with you. It goes beyond your power. So all of those lessons kind of come together and make such an interesting conversation and an interesting story point. So give me your thoughts on Storm and Forge together or not together.
The journey they've put Storm on through the first 4 episodes, and putting her in the stinger in episode 3 and meeting him in Dallas, like it's given, like, you couldn't have compressed all that into 1 episode. And I'm glad that they had her. She's leaving the X-Men, but you don't leave the X-Men. Like, you don't leave a gang. This is a gang. I'm sorry. And you don't fight one X-Men. You fight every X-Man. And I think it was really important to give us that, even that timeline of, okay, so clearly it's been some time since Jean left, and Madeline left, or whoever left. And so that in and of itself gives us a little breathing room there. But I think you're right. One of the really interesting parts of the first half of the episode was Mojo saying, this is an X-Men, and showing like a different world pistache with the X-Men. Shout out to Stephanie Williams, who created Living Heroes.
Oh, another friend of the show.
Definitely inspiration for that joke.
Yeah.
Like,
Stephanie Williams she's in like the 30 Timers Club. She's been on the show many, many, many times.
We interact on Twitter. We've never done a podcast together, but I'm a huge fan of hers.
Yes.
But no, you're right. Like, the emotional tent poles were there, and then with the little, like, the conversation about cooking, and there was so many levels to that, and how he sees things, how they need to be put together, and then I'm not building you a faster horse, like the flirtation, and just that they were able to kind of hit fast forward, and like you said, the pathos and gravitas brought by that voice, you're like, I kind of believe him. Yeah. It just really makes everything that's being delivered hit even harder. But I do think they did a good job of, they had to front load kind of the emotional resonance with the two of them for the betrayal to stick, for the betrayal to land. And I think for half an episode, they definitely achieved that goal.
Can I just say too that I really want to have some of that chili?
It sounds delicious.
Because like bison's a really like hearty meat, and I feel like it would do really well with the slow cooking time. So it's just a thought.
Always put some in the slow cooker.
Oh, whew. Well, you ever watch like a cooking show and it's like, yeah, we put that down for 16 hours, and I just want to faint. Like, the longer the time, the better.
That's tremendous. That's tremendous. But yeah, I think because of the way that this is set up throughout the episode, it makes what happens at the end that much more surprising, horrifying for those who are not familiar with the adversary, who looks scary as hell, and then shows up. dpalm, if you could give us a little backstory on who this entity is.
I kind of don't want to because we're in the first half of it. I don't want to. We don't know what, like. There's an answer, and it would be in line with what Chris Claremont wrote, but I
Okay.
don't know what like. Bishop doesn't take Cable to the future, or excuse me, Nathan to the future in the comics. They're clearly doing some streamlining, some cut chat, and there are answers that, like, I have the benefit of having read like 4 or 5 adversary stories starring Danny Moonstar, and like, so like there is like I'm gonna hold off on revealing that because I think
Okay.
that I trust. I'll tell you this one: after 4 episodes, I trust they're not going to screw it up. I
Here's a
trust they're
better
going to land it.
here's a better question. So, if you were to describe the nature of the adversary,
Okay.
how would you describe it?
There are only 5 X-Men stories: a cure, robots, aliens, other mutants, and demons. And this is the 5th one. This is demons. If you think I'm kidding, go read Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men. He does 4 of them. Like, I'm not kidding. There's only, and all of them involve Scott Summers' day being ruined. But this is like 2 episodes ago, or an episode ago, they gave us Ileana, and they gave us magic, and they gave us these hints of like, oh, there's something. Yes, Inferno was done through these stolen powers, but there's also something else here, and this is more of that something else. And so it's going to be interesting to see how deep in only 10 episodes. I guess they know, but they knew when writing they had the second probably, and they just got announced for the third. If they, for the record, if they announce it to us, they've known. Just know that, like, they just renewed it.
Yep.
No,
Yeah.
that's not how anything works.
Yeah.
They don't have to tell you. They don't have to tell us anything. They can just drop it.
dpalm, I think that you know this, but I think that I always go on about, and I know as we've been doing the show, I think AC has been more and more with me on this. No group is less literate about the thing they care about than comic book movie fans. Comic book movie fans do not understand how movies. They understand comics, but they do not understand how movies and TV work at all.
I need you to meet pro wrestling fans.
Oh,
because
yeah, you're right.
I'm just like, guys, if they're telling you a thing, it's because they want you to know it. Like, that's how wrestling works.
Yeah, you're right.
You don't have to know any of this stuff.
Yeah, that's very true. You know, and it's funny that Storm deals with these spirits and these demons, because if you remember in the original animated series, the Shadow King, and what the Shadow King did with Storm's son. So I think to bring that back in this is a lot of fun. Looking forward to seeing where it goes. It should be pretty exciting. But the dpalm overall, like in terms of your level of excitement for where this series is going, and obviously clearly you're beaming, you're smiling, you're sowing your oats as far as this show is concerned. Tell me, give me everything. Give me your passion. I love to see it.
Like, we won, like nerds, kids who hid your X-Men comics, guys who were trying to see if you can afford a subscription. Remember spinner racks? Those were the best. We won. Like, this is it. Like, it's as much as live action Transformers has betrayed me, live action Marvel has uplifted me and carried me to a place I didn't know existed. And this here, for them not to say, oh, we're doing a new X-Men series, because there have been X-Men animated series since 1997. There's been X-Men Evolution. Yeah. Fantastic. Probably my favorite portrayal of Logan across any continuity. There has been Wolverine and the X-Men, where they teased us with the second season of Age of Apocalypse and didn't deliver. How dare they? But for them to say we're not just doing an X-Men series, for them to say we're not just doing an X-Men series in the style of 97 or 92 or whatever you want to call it, But then to say we're gonna pick up that 5th season no one liked, or we kind of outsourced the animation. We're gonna all of it counted, all of it mattered. We're gonna pick up right from where it was. And Disney has, because of, again, building generational fans, by having the old series on there, they're building their own hype. They're cooking in their own juices. Like, it's a thing where, yes, I get to be excited because it's something I grew up with, but it's also something that's mattered more to me in my life because X-Men, I love X-Men. I always have. I always will. Like, it's the story. It's a very thinly veiled metaphor for standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Like, it's something that is a powerful, positive ethos that's out there. And for people to say, and not only I remember that, but, oh man, this mattered to me, to see the 100 reviews. I don't care about reviews. I don't care about ratings, but to see the positive adulation come through. My wife never liked any of this stuff when she was a kid. I sat her down and put the first episode of X-Men 92 on. And it's all these, like, it is, if you haven't watched it, go back and watch it. It is very
agreed.
unmasked on what they're talking about. She paused it halfway through, looked at me and said, "This is why you're the way that you are." And I took that as the highest compliment possible. And so for me to say, yes, I'm excited, I'm happy, I feel like we won. I feel like Stan Lee won because the things he was yelling in 1964 are being not just heard, but celebrated and trumpeted about 50 years later, 60 years later. And it matters and it counts. And there's someone out there who never heard of X-Men before, who heard the hype and is going to go back and watch all those episodes and feel a little bit less alone. And that's cool. And that's inspiring. And these are modern myths. This is the Greek orators talking about the acts of the gods. And that's how you learn about morality and stories. This is the same thing. It's just done in 4 colors and it's done in 30 minutes. But it's the same. That's the goal. And I think when you start there, that these are morality stories for the masses, not for the children. You could say, oh, that's for children. It's not for children because there are bad people who could stand and read an X-Men comic or two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And who could stand to watch a little X-Men 97. And to stand and hear things like when Berto says, "I'm one of the good ones." Don't you get it? Playing by the rules, they still come for you. Magneto says in episode 2, why would they come for us? We did nothing but give you a trial. You gave a trial to a monster, and now you're a monster too. Don't you get it? People say, oh, well, these things are illegal. It used to be illegal for me to vote. Legal doesn't mean right. And so talking to these higher truths via a man who can manipulate metal, who's begging you not to let you down. Yeah, it's fantastic. And yeah, it's crazy, but it's also very true. Very human and very uniting across cultures, across generations, across different struggles.
I think that was very well said. And I think the thing I'll just add to that is this has been a gift. I think looking at, in my wildest dreams, seeing that trailer for this show, I could have not imagined that it would be this good. 30 years later, or whatever amount of time that it's been, close to 30 years, the fact that it's this good, that it's this powerful, that it's this enriching, that it's this fun. It's just a lot of fun. And I think more so than anything else, what you look for in these stories as a person and as an individual who feels and wants to see how stories go. I love storytelling. I think the route that this has gone has just been about as good as you could possibly even think about. I was thinking about it yesterday as I finished the episode, and I was like, how the hell did they do this? They're doing this so well. Like, I have no complaints. Like, I for something that's about a 30-minute show, it feels like they're telling the story and it does not feel rushed, even though they are telling stories and the story is advancing. Like, it's just so. And I think it's because in a lot of instances with other things, you're just not used to it being so propulsive and also so informative and also so emotional. So emotional. And like I said, right, I'll go right back to the beginning. You get me with a good romance story. You get me with a good yearning. Boy, I will be sitting right there, glued to the television every week.
What
And it's once a
and
week.
what is X-Men but a love story about two men who broke up over ideology?
Yeah.
Isn't this just the fallout of Charles and Eric breaking up, which was made more explicit in episode 2 in that conversation with Rogue? Like, which for the record, in the original series, the helmet didn't block the telepathy. Episode 3, I think it is, when they fight Magneto and he's able to put the Holocaust memories in his head through the helmet. Just
Yeah.
something that's bugged me. I need to say it out loud. Sorry.
That's all good. It's all good. No worries. But yeah, X-Men 97 has been absolutely tremendous. Looking forward to what we get next week with this. dpalm, before we go, there was a lot of Marvel news circulating this week. A lot of things that we've seen. Mentioned a little bit about the Silver Surfer and Fantastic Four. We got a poster today. Uh, it's small news, so I don't want to get to this, but the one thing I did want to mention was yesterday, because I was thoroughly excited and thoroughly heartened by seeing Daredevil and the Punisher standing side by side together as Daredevil Born Again continues filming, and they're bringing their band back together. It is so cool to see these characters come back. It's so cool to see that they really listen to the fans in terms of like, hey, this was something that we really liked. Let's keep these characters. Let's bring back Foggy. Let's bring back Karen Page, and let's tell some good stories. And especially after everything happened, as far as with the original outset of filming this show, and the fact that they had to start over, it really does feel like they paid attention to, hey, if this is not working, let's try and fix it. So if you could tell me a little bit about your excitement for the Daredevil character coming back into form, but also at the same time getting to see the continuation of a lot of these characters that we love coming back.
Shameless plug. If you want to go over to MTR and go to our Super Tuesday podcast, you can hear me talk about these at length. But I'll say this. You can say some things that the MCU may not land with certain people, or they didn't do as effective as possible. You can't say one, they never tried. You can't say a lack of ambition, and you can't say they don't care. And for them to have a schedule that they're going to shift because obviously the strike, but obviously because they felt like they got something tonally wrong with the Daredevil series that they were rolling out. And sometimes it's unwise to say, oh, the fans are going to guide this thing, because we could talk about it for days. But
of course, yeah.
To say that, hey, we're not infallible and we can't get things wrong, and for them to have the lack of ego to say, okay, scrap it, it's not working, try it again. Like, that is a level of patience that is afforded the MCU because of what they've built that's, again, unprecedented in the history of entertainment. And so I could not be more excited. I am always super nervous when they do Karen Page stories, because I read comic books and a lot of those stories aren't great, and they treat women really poorly sometimes. And I'm always like a little nervous. I don't have any. I'm just like, no heroin, right? Okay, good. We're good. Okay, we're safe. Okay, good. They're also pulling from some of the more recent Daredevil runs. I don't know if either of you guys have read Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil run. It's fantastic. But one of the characters, Cole North, apparently has been spotted as an additive character. And that's exciting for me, because that's the best part of the MCU for me, is when they can get the core of the character and then still take new ideas that have worked. Like Kamala Khan's introduction to the MCU. It's not a 6-year-old character, but man, if they didn't say, here are the things that we need to show, and if we fleshed it out from there, it'll be fine. And by God, it was. So I'm very excited with what they're going to do with some of these newer additions to the mythos. And also, if we can, like, I get it. Like, everyone's like, oh, Spider-Man has it bad. Like, Matt's got it so much worse. Like, I get his entire existence is to suffer. He is the Job of the Marvel Universe. I get it. But if we can have an episode where, like, Matt goes to a Mets game and just, like, has a nice afternoon, I'd really appreciate it. Like, they're not going to win because they're the Mets, but still. At least get Matt out of the house and just have a nice day, because everything seems to always be going wrong for this poor man. And the fact that it is in continuity with the previous Netflix series means that this man has had a building dropped on him. Like, this man deserves a day off.
And it's not going to get any better because we
No.
are adapting Devil's Reign, where Fisk is the mayor, and we got the anti-vigilante task force, and then you got the cops wearing the Punisher's symbol because they think that they're carrying out the punishing, and the Punisher's going to have to get busy, and I cannot wait.
And we might get Spider-Man because if Peter Parker doesn't exist, it means we just need someone to do voiceover work and a bunch of stunt guys. Like, I don't need you can do so much with a Peter Parker that's not supposed to unmask. You can put Spider-Man in damn near everything. Like, this, I'm so excited.
This feels, as Vincent D'Onofrio has mentioned in the past, he said, what's one character you like to tangle with? And Spider-Man. Want to tangle with Spider-Man. I don't think he put that out there by accident.
Kingpin came from Spider-Man. Punisher came from Spider-Man. This is a Spider-Man story. Yes, first appearance of Punisher was a Spider-Man comic. Like, this is street level Marvel is Spider-Man's corner.
Yes. I think the only question would be is that basically I think, and I might be wrong about this, but I think that they need Sony's permission if they do anything live action with Spider-Man. Not to say they wouldn't get it, but I think what you're saying with like Tom Holland, like I don't think it's that Tom Holland can't appear. I think it's that Spider-Man can't appear in anything live action, period, without Sony's permission. So I would hopefully they
imagine Sony telling Kevin Feige no.
Imagine that. I could definitely. Sony has done a lot of stupid things. I mean, actually, I can't really say that because Sony is the only big studio that doesn't have a streaming service, so they look pretty smart because of that. But you know, we all lived through the ordeal. There was those like 2 months where Spider-Man was out of the MCU. I'm just not going to. I never want to give Sony credit.
That's your kid running away from home for an afternoon, buddy. That was nothing. We all knew how that was going to end. It was
I understand that.
It was wrestling. They wanted you to see it.
I know.
They wanted us to know.
I guess if Spider-Man's going to be in Daredevil, there's going to be a trade of some kind, though. Because I know that the way that the contract worked was that there's a certain amount of movies that Spider-Man is allowed to be in the MCU. And so I doubt that Kevin Feige would burn one of those movies with a TV show. So, like, maybe the way that Hollywood works is that maybe, like, Disney's like, okay, you can have the remake rights of this movie that came out in the 30s in exchange
We'll let you ruin Kraven, Venom, and any sort of Spider-Woman project we ever want to do if you let us have Spider-Man for 3 episodes.
Well, no, because Sony already owns those, so they don't.
No, I'm just saying they've ruined the these IP are unusable. Like, you've ruined this IP now.
It's believe me. I guess the only reason I say this is because I want to temper people's expectations, because it truly would not surprise me at all if Sony was like, no, you're not allowed to use Spider-Man. That would not surprise me.
This is the year 2024. It's the end of the world. Let's have expectation. Let's have a little fun. Let's breathe a life into something.
Listen, dpalm, I totally agree with your sentiment. I completely understand it. I do think that this story will involve Spider-Man, but it will involve Spider-Man in his own movie. Now, when you bring that element in because listen, as you said, this is a Spider-Man that Peter Parker doesn't exist at this point. So what would be the next logical story, as all he's doing is listening to police scanners? He's gonna get involved with the street stuff. He was a part of the Avengers. He was dealing with all of these space and multiversal and all these other threats. Now you can use this next movie to bring him back to where he belongs. And I think the Daredevil Born Again is a perfect setup to start that anti-vigilante, because one of the biggest vigilante of them all in New York City is one Spider-Man. So I do think that Daredevil Born Again leads into what the next Spider-Man movie, which allegedly is shooting this fall.
I mean, we've already had Matt Murdock in the last one.
Right. Matt Murdock appeared in the last one, so there is already a connection between the two, even though there's no identity knowing to this point. So building that story through Daredevil and having Daredevil interact with all of these other smaller Marvel characters can allow a bigger character in terms of Spider-Man to have his own movie and deal with this anti-vigilante task force that Mr. Fisk has set up. And I think if they build it that way, and it seems like that's the direction that I feel that it's going, I think you have potential for something really, really good to come out of it.
Essentially, let
So
this be your WandaVision building towards Multiverse of Madness. But on
yes,
the level.
yes, exactly. Because I think a Spidey Daredevil team up movie against the Kingpin is just like it writes itself. It can't. To me, that can't be bad with the people with Feige running it. It can't be bad because if it's bad, I would just like lose my mind.
Yeah.
And it feels like the Spider-Man stuff that they've done in the MCU so far has been very meaningful and very good. And coming off of the emotion of what No Way Home was, it'd be nice to see what the street level stuff looks like. So I'm excited to see where it goes. But we'll find out what happens. Just you talking about Daredevil Born Again with the passion that you have just reminded me what I felt yesterday seeing those set photos. I was like, man, we're really back. It's just beautiful to see. And yeah, man, dpalm, it has been an absolute pleasure, sir. Appreciate you for joining the program for the first time. We definitely will have you back. If you could, please let us know where we can follow you, find your work, everything. Plug away, my friend.
You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and I think my Facebook page is the same, at dpalm66, dpalm, because that's my name, 66. I played football in college. You can follow the Unanimous Decision Podcast everywhere you get your podcast for free, $99. We are on Spotify. We are on iTunes. Unanimous Decision comes out twice a week covering the sports you need to know. And I know that my other hosts are still out there, but we're trying to get everything back together for some more character corners as we head into the summer months and far less sports, far more comics, and hopefully we can finish up our Jonathan Hickman X-Men reread.
Oh, awesome stuff. This guy's heavy into the comics. It seems like it's a worthy follow. It's a good follow. Check his stuff out. Should be very excited to get to know you over the next few months, sir. And thank you again. Jay Christie, where can we follow you, sir?
You can follow me on Twitter at @JChristie. Please listen to my other podcast if you're so inclined. Love It First Psych. Me and Andre Barrera talking about the USA Network original series Psych, just starting season 6, excuse me.
Nice. Awesome stuff. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at AnthonyCanton_3. Follow the show at MC University Pod on all platforms, including the YouTube channel. We had an episode earlier this week with Amin Al Hassan talking about Star Wars and Marvel. It was a fun episode to talk with Amin on, so check that out if you haven't already. Patreon.com/MC University Pod, where you can get our bonus content. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol is this month. Very excited to get into that. And if you want to listen to that, if you're so inclined to join us, it's $3 to get in to get all of our backloaded content and get into the Discord. If you want to be an Avengers level member, it's $8. And appreciate everybody for supporting and listening. Also, 5-star the show, not only on Apple and Spotify. Do that 5-star thing. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Do all those things. Appreciate everybody for listening and supporting. For dpalm and Jake Christie, I am Anthony Canton III. This has been Marvel Cinematic University, and we'll talk to you next time.